The fusion event for Gretel Hagsbane has begun, but I have yet to give you my champion reviews. So in today's video, I am going to review Gretel and Hansel and this epic and this rare, and then I'm going to give you my no-fail fusion plan in case you are interested in pursuing this fusion event. There is a ton to cover, so we have to move fast. I am Colred. This is Colred Plays Raid Shadow Legends. Let's get started. Exciting channel news. I will be the featured guest on the next Fateless podcast featuring these three gentlemen here. On your right is Brad, aka Chosen. He is a longtime raid content creator and the host of the Fateless podcast. On your left is Sham, one of the co-founders of Fateless Games and the game director for their very first project, Godforge, which we'll be talking quite a bit about. And then in the middle, you know him as Hell Hades, but he is also Simon, co-founder and face of Fateless Games. Now, I have carte blanche to ask these gentlemen basically any questions I want about their game or their company, so it should be an exciting conversation, and you should check it out. I know that the podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and here on YouTube, but you should consider subscribing to the Fateless channel so you get notifications, or you can also join my Discord community because I will be posting a link to the podcast when it goes live. As always, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Now let's get back to your video. One of the nice things about classic fusions is that they introduce new rares and epics to the game that can act as consolation prizes to players who either aren't yet ready to complete an entire fusion or maybe aren't interested in the legendary in the fusion, but still want to get some value out of the events. So we're going to start by reviewing the rare here. This is Dened the Tusk Knight. As you can see, he is a void defensive-based rare from the Bannerlords faction. Guy feels a little bit like a nod to The Witcher if you're a fan of that series. Taking a look at his stats, we'll notice the HP and defense stats are pretty good. 15k HP, 1222 defense. This is slightly above average for a defensive-based rare, so I certainly think he'll be sturdy enough if you decide to take him up to 6 stars. Taking a look at his kit, his A1 is a single hit on a single target, has a 40% chance of placing a provoke. This is a fairly good rare A1, about standard for like a void rare. You can certainly find value in A1 provokes. In addition, he has this bonkers A2. It is an AoE, but it's the second half that is absolutely crazy. Places the large version of Strengthen on all allies for 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown when booked. There are no other rares in the game that come close to this skill. In fact, if you're looking at epics who place Strengthen buffs, there's only one who matches this skill, and that is Morag Bronzelock. Every other epic who places Strengthen either places it only on a single target, places the lesser version of Strengthen, or has a 4-turn cooldown on their skill. So you literally have to go up to Legendary to find a third champion after Morag and Dened who places a skill like this on this cooldown. That's absolutely bonkers. Right away, I think this skill catapults Dened into the discussion, at least, of maybe being a top 10 or top 20 rare in all of Raid. Now, if we look at his passive, he also gets a little bit of a shield when he's hit by an enemy under a provoke debuff. So with the provoke on his A1, and remember, he's void affinity, so he's not going to weak hit. Plus the AoE on the A2, I'm thinking, put him in a provoke set. Get him in a provoke set. You maybe even can use him in Hydra, like normal Hydra, right? But if you're trying to get into Hydra, if you're in the early game or mid game, this is a champion that could provide you with a lot for that fight. He's going to provide you with the A1 provoke that can't weak hit, potentially, maybe even a curse set. You can put him in a curse set on the A2 or a provoke set on the A2. Get some more debuffs out there that you need. If you're not going to use him in Hydra, consider him for other wave content like Doom Tower, Faction Crypts, maybe even some dungeons. You could put him in a stun set as well, and then you're getting provokes, stuns, and strengthens out. Those are all good ways to keep your team alive. So he's going to add a lot of sturdiness to any team he's a part of. And like I said, potentially could be a budget Hydra champion. Let me know in the comments below what you think about Dened. Am I overrating him, or is he as strong as I think he is? I think this is going to be a great champion for a lot of players. And remember, you can get up to 16 copies of him during this event. I think if you get all 16, you should go for the legendary. But you could get a lot of copies of him for free during the fusion event. And he only takes 9 books. So if you can get 10 copies of this, you can have them fully booked out, or maybe you can even keep extra copies if you need some help in the Bannerlords faction crypt. Okay, let's move on to the Epic, who is in the same faction. Her name is Signy of High Shield. I think she's pretty cool looking. She certainly looks tough. I wouldn't want to get in a fight with her. I like her sword. I also like the fact that Raid is playing around with more body model types for the female human or humanoid characters. Yeah, I think this is pretty cool. We do see that a little bit in like the orcs and ogrins and stuff like that, but not in humans. I think this is a unique body model for any kind of human or humanoid character. And I appreciate that. I just think that's cool. Now let's take a look at her. She is a Magic Affinity HP-based champion from the Bannerlords faction. Her stats are solid. Over 20,000, almost 21,000 HP, almost 1,200 defense. This is going to be a sturdy HP-based champion. Certainly a candidate for a shield set or a bolster set. Yeah, so it should be sturdy enough. She also has 45 accuracy, which is kind of interesting. Now, her A1 is a double hitter. Each hit has a 50% chance when booked of placing the large decreased resistance for 2 turns. Each hit will also heal her by 20% of the damage inflicted. So she's got a bit of sustain, but more than that, she's got this decreased resistance on her A1. It's got a 75% chance of landing as long as she's not weak affinity. I'm already thinking Frost Spider in Doom Tower. Getting a decreased resistance on that champion is so helpful. That means you don't have to rebuild a whole bunch of other champions to increase their accuracy or bring in an increased accuracy aura to that fight, because you need that high accuracy in that fight. So I think the decreased resistance, you only have to build Signy with high accuracy. She could potentially land that decreased resistance, make that fight a lot easier. It's a bit niche, but there are a few places where decreased resistance is really useful. Now, her A2 is also pretty good. It is on a 3-turn cooldown, has a 100% chance before attacking of removing 1 random debuff from all allies, so it's a mini cleanse. And then after the attack has a 100% chance of removing 1 random buff from all enemies. Again, if you're building her with accuracy for the decreased resistance, then that's going to help you remove buffs from enemies. I kind of wish these were reversed. I wish the removal of the buff happened before the attack. The cleanse could happen after. That's not as critical, I think. I'm not sure if this is going to work on the poison spider, whatever, Agreth, I guess it is, right? Whoever, the Doom Tower spider who places poison has the spiderlings who counterattack. I think this attack may still activate their counterattack and then remove the buff afterwards, but I'm not 100% sure. We're going to have to kind of play test that when we actually have that rotation. Now, her A3 is on a 4-turn cooldown, places increased resistance and reflect damage on all allies. And that reflect damage is nice because when this champion is under a reflect damage buff and an enemy attempts to place a debuff, has a 20% chance to reflect the debuff back onto the attacker. So I'm thinking Bommel, I'm thinking any spider boss, maybe even the scarab boss. She's going to be good with that decreased resistance, with the reflect of the debuffs, which is really cool, and the increased resistance to just resist bombs and poisons and all those, and provokes and those sorts of things. So definitely a champion. Again, if you're in the early game or in the mid game, you should consider. I don't think she's going to have any use at end game, but at least a viable epic. I would say, you know, maybe like a B tier epic, a little bit niche, but in those places where you need that decreased resistance or increased resistance, she's going to be highly useful. Let's continue on to the legendaries. We are in the sacred order here for both of them. It is Hansel and Gretel, so we'll start with Hansel. Now, he is an attack-based Magic Affinity champion, legendary. You can see his attack number is actually really high, 1,663. It's not the highest in the game, but it's probably in the top, like, 10 champions maybe in the game. So really nice attack numbers. His defense number and HP number is okay for an attack-based nuker. I don't think he's going to be particularly sturdy. He's going to be squishy, but you kind of want that for Hansel and for Gretel. We're going to talk about why in just a second. So if you take a look at his A1, this has a 75% chance of placing a weakened debuff for 2 turns. This is a pretty good legendary A1. Usually the 100% weakens are on on void legendaries like Arbiter. But it's weird because Athel also has a 100% weaken on her A1, so I always wish that legendaries would have 100% if they're going to have a weaken or decreased defense on their A1, but 75% chance is still very good. If Gretel is on the team, this becomes an AoE, and it still has that 75% chance of placing weaken on everybody, but it will also place an extra hit on enemies under any debuffs. So if you land the weaken, you get another hit, or if there's another champion that goes first and lands a debuff, then this is going to hit twice. So you can see already that Gretel's adding a lot of value here to Hansel, and the reverse will also be true, as we'll see in just a moment. His A2 attacks 2 times, ignores shield and unkillable buffs, grants an extra turn if this attack kills an enemy. This is on a 3-turn cooldown. If this hits hard, this will make him a viable champion even without Gretel. Like, he won't need his duo if this skill is good enough, because ignoring shields and unkillable buffs, that's really useful, especially in places like PvP, and it grants that extra turn, which is incredibly valuable. That means you could potentially get the A1 weaken in, or you could get this A3 in. Now, this A3 attacks all enemies, ignores 15% of each target's defense. That's always great. Also increases the cooldown of 1 random skill on each enemy by 2 turns. So the weaken and the cooldown does take accuracy. They both take accuracy. So you're going to want to put some accuracy in his kit if you want these effects. However, if Gretel's on the same team, this will ignore 30% instead of 15% of each target's defense, and will increase the cooldown of all enemy skills by 2 turns instead of 1 turn, and this cooldown increasing effect cannot be resisted. So if you don't care about the weaken, which you probably do, but if you don't, you can build him without accuracy, make him hit harder, and if Gretel's on the team, you'll still have this cooldown increasing effect because it won't be able to be resisted. Now, his passive reflects all fear and true fear debuffs from this champion to the attacker. If Gretel's on the team, it also reflects her debuffs onto the attacker. That could be useful in Hydra. And then if Gretel Hagsbane is on the same team and is killed, so if Gretel gets killed, it instantly activates Baneful Burst, which is this A3, right? Which is going to ignore all of that defense. So I think Hansel is pretty good on his own. If Gretel is on the team, he's even better. He's significantly better with her on the team. But I certainly think his A2 with the extra turn, his A1 weaken, and his AoE that ignores defense, all of these are all good skills. I think he's probably like an A tier legendary on his own, highly useful in PvP, and maybe useful in some other places, maybe even some boss fights because of that weaken and the ignore defense. Now let's go ahead and look at the fusion champion, who is Gretel. So this is actually the fusion champion. I've got to say, I'm always a little bit disappointed in the Sacred Order, skins. This is, both Hansel and Gretel are they could be epics. They could be epics. I'm a little bit disappointed in their look. But if you look at other legendaries in this faction, they all kind of look this, they're yeah, okay, this is a legendary in the faction. If you go to a void legendary, you're going to get a little bit of, it's a little zhuzhed up. It's a little bit more fancy. But even here, Venus is a void legendary. Yeah, she's, she was a Valentine's Day champion, so you see the heart motif, but a little bit underwhelming. I mean, if you go down to an epic, look at Sanguinia, right? Look at Deacon. They look the same as the legendaries. You can even go down to the rares here, and the rares look pretty cool. These are almost as good as the legendary skins in this faction. So I'm always a little bit disappointed by the Sacred Order skins for most of their champions, and Hansel and Gretel are moderately cool. They look like cool epics to me, I guess. But anyway, let's take a look at her kit. She is a Force Affinity attack-based legendary from the Sacred Order. And again, if you look at her stats, about the same as Hansel's, not quite as much attack, 100 less attack or so, a little bit more speed, I think. I think maybe they're the same speed. Let me check. Same speed. They're both 100 speed. Again, decently survivable, but nothing special for an attack-based legendary. She's going to be squishy. But again, that's a good thing, because remember, if she dies, Hansel gets his skill activated. That's the same thing here. If Hansel dies, then this instantly activates her AoE as well. So both of them can get an AoE for free if the other dies. The problem is they are equally squishy. So chances are they're going to die simultaneously, and you're not going to get any value out of that. So if you're going for PvP, you might want to put one of them in a stone skin set, Or if you're doing PvE, I don't think these skills really activate at all. You can't really plan on these activation skills. So, there's that. Now, the A1 here attacks one enemy, has a 75% chance, it looks like, of placing a decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. So Hansel places the weaken, Gretel places the decreased defense. And again, same thing. If Hansel's on the team, this becomes an AoE, and it places an extra hit on enemies under buffs. Hansel places extra hit under debuffs. So similar A1s. The A2 is a 4-hitter. That's always nice. It's on a 3-turn cooldown. And it will ignore a whole bunch of defense, but in a weird way. I don't know why this matters. Why not make all the hits 20% or something? That's very strange. But it's 10, then 15, then 20, then 25. Okay. If this attack kills an enemy, resets the cooldown of this skill, and fills this champion's turn meter by 50%. So this is kind of cool. If you're taking her into PvP, this could be like an anti-Rotos skill, maybe. Remember that no one hit can take more than 50% of Rotos's health because of his passive. So maybe this is good against a Rotos team. And then if you kill the Rotos or whoever your target is, resets the cooldown of the skill and fills this champion's turn meter by 50%, which is a significant percentage. The A3 is an AoE, decreases the turn meter of all enemies by 25%. I think this is her best PvE skill, right? Because it decreases turn meter of all enemies, and that's always nice. And then if Hansel's on the team, that becomes 50% turn meter decrease, and it cannot be resisted. So again, if you don't care about the A1 decreased defense and you only care about this turn meter, you don't need accuracy. But if you do care about the decreased defense, you have to put accuracy in the kit anyway. Then fills this champion's turn meter by 20% for each enemy alive after the attack. Now, this is significant because she could potentially get 100% of her turn meter back on this skill. Plus, she gets turn meter back on this skill. So she could potentially get a lot of turn meter. Now, she's also got this passive, fills this champion's turn meter by 50% whenever an enemy is granted an extra turn. That's probably going to be most useful against mythical champions who take an extra turn to transform. If Hansel is on the team, also fills his turn meter by 50% whenever an enemy is granted an extra turn. And then if Hansel is on the same team and killed by the enemy, instantly activates the AoE. So I think that the extra turn mechanic is kind of interesting. I don't think they're going to be great PvE characters. I think Hansel's a little bit better. They're definitely better together. They feel like they're made for PvP. They might be okay in Hydra or other wave content because you get the AoE decreased defense and the AoE weaken, like from the two of them if they're together. But yeah, I think they are okay. I think if you were going to get one or the other, you'd probably prefer Hansel. But I expect because they're a duo, there's going to be some way to get Hansel in the near future. So getting Gretel now might be a smart move, especially if it's not going to cost you a lot. I wouldn't overextend for this champion. I don't think she's like an S tier champion. I think she's probably like a B tier champion, maybe an A tier champion when she's paired with Hansel. But they may give us a chance to get both champions. And I think that would certainly be useful, especially if you don't really have a great arena nuker. I think she could certainly do the job for you. But remember, she does take those books. She takes 10 books, it looks like here. And then you've got Hansel, who's also going to take a whole bunch of books. He's probably 10 books as well. He's exactly 10 books. So you're talking about 20 books for this duo, who I think even together may not be S tier. That's my feeling on it. So if you have decided that Gretel's still interesting enough to use, especially with the potential of a free Hansel out there in the future, there are definitely people who are going to go for this. Maybe you like their look. Maybe you like the story. Maybe you just think based on your roster, they're going to give you a lot of value. Then this is the Fusion event calendar you have to worry about. Now, we have seen something like this before. This is a very straightforward classic Fusion calendar. And in fact, just a few months ago, we saw almost a mirror image, not even a mirror image, just like a carbon copy of this Fusion calendar here. And that is Wixwell. So I want to take you here to hellhades.com. If you don't know, yep, there we go. If you don't know, you can come to HH Gaming here, hellhades.com. And if you go to Raid Shadow Legends guides and tier lists, there is a section for past Fusion events. You can go and check out any of the past Fusion events that have happened since the game launched. So I went and looked at Wixwell's here, And as you can see, it's a very similar setup with the Summon Rush at the end, the Champion Chase tournament at the beginning. The Dungeon Divers are all in the same place. It's lined up slightly differently, but again, it has a Void, Rare, and a non-Void Epic. So this is almost a mirror copy for what we're seeing here with Gretel. I do think that the Wixwell fusion was a relatively easy fusion, and so the Gretel fusion should be a relatively easy fusion, but there are some additional wrinkles I want to talk about here on the calendar. So the first thing is there are 16 events for the rares, and then this event, the Summon Rush, you can see is also this Summon Rush. There are exactly 16 events, but this Summon Rush can also get you an epic, and we're going to talk about that as we go. Now, one of the annoying things about this particular fusion setup is that for most of the Dungeon Divers, for this Dungeon Diver, you only have the Ice Golem tournament. For this Dungeon Divers, you only have the Dragon tournament. And then for this Dungeon Divers, you do, in fact, have a little bit of the Spider tournament, right? You have this part of the Spider tournament. And then you also have this part of the Fire Knight tournament. So Dungeon Divers is going to be a little bit tricky in this particular fusion, but that's really always the case. So I would certainly say, you know, with the champion training event going on here, you could do a lot of campaign. I think this would be a great place to do campaign. That's going to help you with that Dungeon Divers. I'm sorry, not to here, to here. This part of the champion training is really good to do with the Dungeon Divers. As far as the last one is concerned, you also have the champion training from here to here. So this can also be a good place to do campaign. That's going to get you some extra Dungeon Divers points when you do campaign. But you're probably going to have to sink a lot of extra energy into whatever dungeons that you feel like doing during these Dungeon Divers events. So if we get the Ice Golem for free, we get the Dragon for free, and then we get the Fire Knight and the Spider for free, that means we are putting in 5k energy here. We're putting in 5k energy here. And we're putting in 5k energy here. And so we could probably complete this entire event with somewhere in the vicinity of 15k energy. Everything else is taken care of with that 15k. So you're looking around 15k energy. I would say 16k just to be safe. And again, it's going to depend on how efficiently you can farm. If you can't do stage 20s, it may take you a little bit more energy. Not a lot more energy. It's still pretty efficient everywhere that you farm, as long as you're kind of paying attention to like the drop tables. Like if you know those, you know, there are some other efficient places to farm. So maybe, you know, 16, 17k energy, 18k energy. But I'd say this is not a bad amount of energy. This is usually pretty good. Remember, the artifact enhancements typically take about 20 million per event. You can certainly do it for less if you get lucky. But with 3 of them, we are looking at 60 million silver. And remember, for both of these cases, you do not have to have this saved. That's not a requirement. This is over the course of 15 days. So in 15 days, you need to come up with 15,000 energy. That's not that bad, right? You're getting a lot of energy for free anyway. You have free energy from CVC. You have energy from login rewards. You have energy from the free gifts that you get in the shop. So 15k energy is not so bad. If you have no energy right now, you should still be able to get this 15k energy in the 15 days. The 60 million silver is a little bit trickier, right? What I would say is if you are short on silver, every time you need to pour extra energy into a Dungeon Divers anywhere, go and run Spider, because accessories sell for a lot more than regular artifacts. So if you do that, that means you're going to be putting about 12,000 energy into Spider over the course of this entire tournament. That should get you close to the 60 million on its own. So I would say if you have 5 to 10 million right now, that would sort of be the minimum I would feel comfortable with. If you have like 15 to 20 million right now, you should be absolutely fine. Now we got to talk about the Shard events. There is a Champion Chase tournament right here, starts tomorrow, and this is a 2x weekend. Now, if you look at hellhades.com, it says 2x Ancients. The rotation has been messed up and it feels like it should be a 2x Ancient week. But if Plarium feels like messing with us, it could be 2x Voids. I feel fairly comfortable assuming it's not 2x Sacreds. It's probably not 2x Primals, but it could be. So we're going to get a 2x weekend here. And that means you're likely going to want to do the Champion Chase because it's a 2x weekend. Now, the Summon Rush will not be on a 2x weekend. And typically this takes 6 Sacreds. All right. But here's the thing. We also have the Epic here on the Summon Rush. Now, if you want this one, you're probably going to have to do an additional 5 Sacreds. So if you want to complete the Summon Rush entirely, it's going to take 11 Sacred Shards to do it. And it's most likely that you're going to want to pull Sacred Shards. So what you have to do is decide now if you want to go for, I guess you don't have to decide now, but you should think about it now. Are you going to go for the extra Epic? Because remember, an Epic is worth 4 rares. So we just talked about all of the stuff that's going on here. If you're worried about energy, you could potentially cross out all of the Dungeon Divers events. You could get rid of all of them. And that would knock you down to about a 6K energy. So you would save 9,000 energy if you got the Epic. You could also potentially knock off an Artifact Enhancement event if you wanted to save 20 million silver. So you could knock off 3 Dungeon Divers and 1 Artifact Enhancement event just by going for this Summon Rush with 5 Sacreds. I'm not sure how valuable that is. If you have the energy and you have the silver, it's always easier to get energy and silver, I think, than Sacred Shards if you're free to play. If you're a spender and you want to do this fusion, but you don't want to spend forever doing it, you want a really, really easy fusion, buy yourself 5 Sacreds, however much that money that is, and do the Summon Rush. And then you can skip 4 of these, otherwise tedious events. I mean, we all want to skip the Dungeon Divers events, but you could skip any events that you want. You could even skip the Champion Chase tournament up here if you're not interested in pulling the 2x Ancients or Voids that it happens to be. Like, I would probably not pull the 2x Ancients. I would probably go for the Summon Rush myself because I save up Ancients for other things. But I'm not sure I'm going to go for this fusion at all. So anyway, that is the no-fail fusion plan. I think we've covered everything. Let me know in the comments below. Are you going for this champion? Do you think she's good enough to go for? Are you hoping to get the duo? Or is this a hard pass for you? I think if you are passing, you shouldn't feel bad about it. I think she's going to be okay, but not phenomenal. And if you miss out on her, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. But if you are going to skip this, I highly recommend getting at least a copy of the rare and maybe a copy of the Epic if you can, because I think those are both viable champions. All right, that is it for me today. Thanks for hanging out. I have been Colred. I will see you in another video soon.